A millionaire races against time to a divorce hearing that could cost him half of his fortune. On the way, he finds an unconscious baby locked in a car under suffocating heat. Without hesitation, he breaks the window to save the child. But what happens next leaves the millionaire completely shocked. The sun beat down mercilessly on the busy streets of São Paulo as Marcus Vandenberg, one of the city's most successful businessmen, hurriedly made his way through the crowd. His Armani suit fit perfectly, but his face betrayed the stress tormenting him. He checked his Patek Philippe watch for what felt like the 100th time and cursed under his breath. In exactly 35 minutes, the court case that would determine his future was set to begin. The divorce from his wife Sophia threatened to split his carefully built business empire in two. 15 years of marriage were on the verge of ending, in a bitter battle over his 2 billion real fortune. Marcus knew his absence from this crucial hearing would have catastrophic consequences, but the traffic in São Paulo had other plans for him. As he pushed through the crowd, his thoughts drifted back to the moment everything had changed. Sophia had accused him of neglect, of prioritizing his work over their family. Perhaps she was right. The past few years had been a blur of business, deals, international flights, and endless meetings. He mostly saw their son Thomas through video calls, and the rare moments they spent together as a family were overshadowed by the constant ringing of his phone. His lawyer's receptionist had already called him 3 times to warn him that the judge was known for his punctuality. If Marcus wasn't on time, it would seriously harm his case. He quickened his pace, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the pavement as sweat dripped down his back. Suddenly, a faint sound broke through his hurried thoughts. Marcus stopped abruptly, causing a young woman behind him to nearly bump into him. There it was again, a soft, whimpering sound barely audible over the city noise. His instinct told him to keep walking. He didn't have time for distractions. But something about that sound gripped him by the throat. He turned around, his eyes searching for the source of the noise. Among the parked cars, he spotted a black Mercedes with tinted windows. The sound seemed to be coming from there. Marcus hesitated. His watch ticked mercilessly, but that sound, there was something desperate in it that he couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, he walked toward the car. The sun reflected off the dark windows, making it impossible to see inside at first. He cupped his hands against the glass and peered in. His heart skipped a beat. On the back seat lay a baby, flushed and covered in sweat, eyes closed. Time seemed to stand still as Marcus stood there, his own problems suddenly fading into insignificance. The temperature inside the car must have been unbearable under the scorching São Paulo sun. Without thinking, he looked around for something to break the window. A nearby store had a fire extinguisher by the entrance. Marcus ran over, grabbed it, and returned to the car. The Mercedes alarm blared as he smashed the window, but he ignored the deafening noise and the shocked stares of passers-by. Carefully but quickly, he lifted the baby out of the sweltering car, not caring about the glass shards cutting his hands. Marcus wrapped the baby in his expensive jacket and ran to the nearest hospital, completely forgetting his court appointment. The little one lay limp in his arms, breathing shallow and fast. His heart pounded in his throat as he burst through the hospital doors, shouting for help. A team of doctors sprang into action. A tall man in a white coat took charge, but when he saw the baby, he froze. His face turned deathly pale and he dropped to his knees. "Miguel," he whispered hoarsely, "my son." The world seemed to spin around Marcus as he watched the drama unfold. Dr. Eduardo Santos, as his name tag indicated, was clearly the father of the child he had just saved. Before Marcus could explain what had happened, the doors burst open, and police officers stormed in. "Marcus Vandenberg," the officer's voice was harsh and businesslike, "you're under arrest for vandalism and attempted kidnapping." The accusations were absurd, but Marcus understood the situation he was in. Man in an expensive suit smashing a car and running off with a baby. It didn't look good. As the officers handcuffed him, he tried to explain what had happened, but no one seemed to listen. Dr. Santos stood there, his son now safely in his arms, a mix of gratitude and confusion on his face. A nurse rushed over with the news that the Mercedes had been reported stolen and that the baby's nanny had gone missing. As Marcus was led away, he received a phone call that made his stomach churn. His lawyer. Due to his absence at the hearing, the judge had ruled in favor of his wife. He would lose half of his fortune, and his chances of shared custody over Thomas were severely damaged. At the police station, an even more complex story unfolded. The missing nanny turned out not to be a nanny at all. She was an investigative journalist who had posed as a childcare worker to gain access to the upper echelons of São Paulo. Her name was Isabella Rocha, and she was investigating a private clinic suspected of unethical practices. Marcus sat in the interrogation room, his head pounding from the events of that morning. His life had been completely turned upside down in just a few hours, but as he sat there, he began to see connections he had previously missed. The timing of everything was too perfect to be a coincidence. The stolen Mercedes, strategically parked on his route to the courthouse. The baby of a prominent doctor, left in a way that was guaranteed to catch his attention. The missing journalist investigating a private clinic. Someone wanted him not to appear in court that morning. Someone who wanted to discredit him. But why, what did a private clinic have to do with his divorce? And why was Dr. Santos's baby used as bait? Marcus knew he was in deep trouble, but he also felt he was on the verge of discovering something bigger, something that went far beyond his personal problems. After hours of interrogation, Marcus was finally released thanks to the intervention of Dr. Santos, who confirmed his story. The doctor was waiting for him in the lobby of the police station, his face marked by fatigue and worry. "Mr. Vandenberg, I must thank you and ask for your forgiveness." Marcus looked at the doctor inquisitively. There was something in the way Dr. Santos avoided his gaze that set off his business instincts. "You know more about this situation, don't you?" he asked directly. Eduardo Santos sighed deeply and gestured toward a deserted coffee corner. "What I'm about to tell you must stay between us," he whispered, nervously looking around. "The private clinic that journalist was investigating. I work there as a consultant, or rather I used to, until I discovered what was really going on." Marcus leaned forward, his tired mind suddenly alert. The doctor continued his story in a trembling voice. "It started a year ago. We got new equipment, new protocols, experimental treatments that weren't registered anywhere. At first I thought it was groundbreaking research, but then the irregularities began." A waitress interrupted their conversation, but Marcus noticed she lingered unusually long at their table. He moved the conversation outside, where they walked through the busy streets of São Paulo. Dr. Santos went on about unexplained patient transfers, missing files, and bizarre orders from above. "But what does this have to do with your son? With the missing journalist?" Marcus pressed. He felt there was something off about the doctor's story. "Miguel wasn't just left in that car," Eduardo confessed in a broken voice. "They used him to warn me, and now that you're involved—" He stopped abruptly and paled. Across the street stood a man in a dark suit, observing them intently. "We're being followed," Marcus muttered. He grabbed the doctor by the arm and pulled him into a crowded shopping mall. As they moved through the crowd, Eduardo hurriedly continued. "The clinic is run by Dr. Victor Almeida. He was once my mentor, a brilliant doctor, but his methods became increasingly unorthodox. He has connections with pharmaceutical companies, with people in high positions. People like you, Mr. Vandenberg." Marcus stopped in his tracks. "What do you mean?" "Your wife, Sophia. She sits on the board of one of the clinic's major investors. And the timing of your divorce, today's court case, it was all planned." The world seemed to spin around Marcus. Sophia's lawyer had insisted on this specific date for the hearing. Did she have something to do with this? Or was she also a pawn in a bigger game? A scream broke through his thoughts. Chaos had erupted on the escalator behind them. Marcus turned around and just caught a glimpse of their pursuer pushing through the crowd, now accompanied by two others. Eduardo reached into his pocket and shoved a USB drive into Marcus's hand. "All the evidence is on here. The experiments, the names, the money trails. Isabella risked her life to gather this. Find her before they do. And beware of Dr. Almeida. He's not the man I thought he was." Marcus sat in his office, staring at the USB drive in his hand. The security footage from the mall had confirmed that their pursuers were professional security personnel employed by the private clinic. Dr. Santos had made it home safely with his son, but hadn't responded to any messages since. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. His secretary Paula stood in the doorway with a concerned look. "There's someone here to see you, Mr. Vandenberg. She says it's about Isabella Rocha." Marcus' heart skipped a beat. In the doorway appeared an elegant, middle-aged woman. "Helena Rocha," she introduced herself, "Isabella's mother, and I think we can help each other." She took a seat across from him and pulled out an envelope. "This arrived this morning, addressed to me but meant for you." She slid the envelope across his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter and a key. "My daughter told me 2 weeks ago that she was working on the biggest story of her career," Helena said as Marcus read the letter. She had spent months preparing to infiltrate the upper circles of São Paulo. The nanny job for Dr. Santos was her cover, but her real target was the private clinic. Marcus looked up from the letter. Isabella's handwriting was rushed, but her message was clear. She had rented a safe under a false name, knowing she might need to go into hiding. The key would grant access to more evidence. "Why do you trust me?" Marcus asked Helena. "You know I was arrested on suspicion of—" "Because Isabella trusted." "Are you?" she interrupted. "In her last message to me, she wrote about the powerful businessman with a conscience. She knew you would pass by that car today. She knew you would stop to help." A shiver ran down Marcus's spine. "It was a test?" Helena nodded slowly. "Partly. But the baby was never in danger. There were people watching, ready to step in if you walked away. Isabella needed to be sure you were the right person to finish her investigation." Marcus stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, a labyrinth of buildings and secrets. Somewhere out there, Isabella was hiding, possibly in danger, and his ex-wife Sophia was somehow involved in all of this. "There's something else you need to know," Helena said softly. "The clinic, they're not just experimenting with new treatments. They gather information about their wealthy patients, which they use as blackmail. Your divorce, Mr. Vandenberg, was no coincidence." Marcus turned around. "What do you mean?" "Dr. Almeida has a file on you about the real reason your father died so suddenly 5 years ago, the treatment he received at the clinic. It wasn't a routine procedure like they told you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father had always been his role model, a self-made man who built his empire from nothing. His sudden death had never fully made sense to Marcus, but he had never questioned the official explanation from the doctors. A new message on his phone interrupted his thoughts. It was from an unknown number. "Locker 247 Central Station. You have 2 hours, come alone." Marcus looked at Helena, who nodded. "Go," she said. "I'll try to reach Sophia. If she's really involved in all this, she deserves the chance to tell her side of the story." São Paulo's Central Station was a bustling crowd when Marcus arrived. He had left his driver 2 blocks away and kept checking to see if he was being followed. The locker room was in a quieter corner of the station, monitored by outdated security cameras. With trembling hands, he inserted the key into locker 247. Inside, he found only a mobile phone and a note. "Platform 7, last car now." Marcus checked his watch. The last train of the day would depart in 5 minutes. He hurried through the corridors, his heart pounding in his throat. On the platform, an old locomotive with 4 cars was ready to depart. The last car was almost empty, except for a woman engrossed in a newspaper. As he approached, she lowered the paper. "Isabella," he whispered, recognizing her from the photos Helena had shown him. Her face was thinner than in the pictures, with dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was sharp and intelligent. "Mr. Vandenberg," she nodded. "Take a seat. We have exactly 8 minutes before this train departs. If anyone is following us, they'll have to show themselves now." Marcus sat across from her, his eyes scanning the otherwise empty car. "You planned all this," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I had no choice," Isabella replied. "Dr. Almeida's network is everywhere. In the police, in the media, in the business world, I had to make sure I found the right person to trust with this story. By putting a baby in danger? His voice came out sharper than intended. Isabella shook her head. Miguel was never in danger. Dr. Santos was working with us. We needed to test your reaction. But more importantly, we needed to keep you away from that lawsuit. Why? Because your ex-wife was supposed to sign a document today that would give her full control over the Vandenberg Foundation. A foundation that, coincidentally, would become the largest donor to Dr. Almeida's new research facility. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The Vandenberg Foundation had been established by his father, intended to fund medical research. After his father's death, Marcus had left the board to Sophia, who had always been more involved in the charity work. Sophia, is she... He couldn't finish the question. A victim, just like you, Isabella said softly. Dr. Almeida pressured her with information about your father's treatment. She thinks she's saving lives by cooperating. The truth is... She suddenly stopped and paled. Marcus turned around. A man in a dark suit was walking down the aisle. The train began to move. Trust Sophia, Isabella whispered quickly. But don't trust Dr. Almeida's assistant. Maria Suarez isn't who she appears to be. The man in the suit was now close enough to see their faces. Isabella abruptly stood up. Follow the money trail, she said, before rushing to the next car. The man hesitated for a moment, his gaze crossing with Marcus's before he followed her. Marcus wanted to stand up to help her, but felt something hard pressed against his side. A second man had sat down beside him, a weapon hidden under his jacket. Stay seated, Mr. Vandenberg. This conversation is over. The train slowed down as it approached the next station. Marcus was forced to get off, his thoughts still lingering on Isabella's last words. Maria Suarez, he knew that name. She was Dr. Almeida's right hand, a brilliant researcher often cited in medical journals. Back in his office, a surprise awaited him. Sophia was sitting in his chair, pale but composed. We need to talk, she said simply. Marcus closed the door and looked at the woman who had shared 15 years of his life. Why didn't you tell me? He asked softly. They forced me, Sophia whispered. Tears glistened in her eyes. They had evidence about your father's treatment, about what really happened at that clinic. If I didn't cooperate, they would make it public. You would lose everything, your company, your reputation, even Thomas. Marcus sat down across from her. Tell me everything. Sophia took a deep breath. It started 3 months after your father's death. Maria Suarez contacted me. She told me she had evidence that your father had been used as a test subject for an experimental treatment. A treatment that wasn't approved, one that ultimately... Go on, Marcus said hoarsely. They blackmailed me into making the Vandenberg Foundation available for their research. Dr. Almeida claimed he was working on treatments that would save lives, that your father's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. I wanted to protect you, Marcus. You had already lost so much. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting over São Paulo, bathing the city in a golden glow that starkly contrasted with the dark revelations of the day. Isabella told me I could trust you, he finally said, but she warned me about Maria Suarez. Sophia's face twisted. Maria, she's more dangerous than Almeida. She's the one running the network, collecting and using all the information. She has connections with people in the highest circles, and she has a personal reason to seek revenge on the Vandenberg family. What do you mean? Her real name is Maria Santos. She's the sister of Eduardo Santos and the widow of one of the first patients who died from the clinic's experimental treatments, a treatment that was partly funded by your father's company before he became a patient himself. Marcus sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Eduardo Santos hadn't told him everything. The connections were deeper, more personal than he had suspected. A soft ping broke the silence, an email on his computer. The sender was unknown, but the attachment bore a name that made his blood run cold. Project Phoenix, test results Alberto Vandenberg. This is it, Sophia whispered. The evidence Isabella was looking for. She must have managed to send it before they caught her. Marcus stared at the screen, his finger hovering over the mouse. Opening this document would mean there was no turning back. He glanced at Sophia, who nodded. "It's time we know the truth," she said softly. "About your father, about the clinic, about everything." Marcus clicked on the attachment, unaware that this action would trigger a chain reaction no one could have foreseen. The document opened on Marcus's screen, page after page filled with medical terminology and charts. But amidst the technical details, a story unfolded that turned his stomach. Project Phoenix hadn't been ordinary medical research. It was an experiment in life extension, using patients as unwitting test subjects. "This can't be true," Marcus muttered as he scrolled through the pages. "My father would never—" He stopped mid-sentence. On the screen, he was staring at a handwritten note in his father's distinctive handwriting. "Too dangerous. Project must stop." Sophia leaned over his shoulder. "Look at the date," she whispered. 3 days before his final treatment. Marcus clicked further through the document, his hands trembling on the mouse. There it was, his father's complete treatment protocol. Alberto Vandenberg hadn't just been a patient. He'd been on the verge of shutting down the entire project after discovering the truth. "He knew," Marcus said hoarsely. "He found out what was going on, and they silenced him." A new email popped up in his inbox, this time from a familiar address, Dr. Eduardo Santos. The message was brief. "Come to the hospital immediately. Maria is here." Marcus and Sophia exchanged a glance. "It's a trap," Sophia said softly. "Probably," Marcus agreed, "but Eduardo's son is there too. We can't abandon him." They took the elevator to the parking garage where Marcus's driver was waiting. On the way, Sophia told him more about Maria Suarez, or Maria Santos, as her real name was. After her husband's death, she became obsessive. She rose quickly in the medical world, specializing in experimental treatments. No one made the connection to the widow of a deceased patient. "But why did Eduardo help her?" Marcus asked. "He must have known who she was." "Blackmail," Sophia answered grimly. "Maria had proof that Eduardo had been involved in the early experiments before he knew how dangerous they were. She threatened to ruin his career, take his son away." They were interrupted by the car screeching to a halt. Ahead of them, an ambulance was parked sideways across the road. 2 men in paramedic uniforms stepped out, but their demeanor betrayed that they weren't ordinary first responders. "Drive," Marcus shouted at his driver, but it was too late. The rear window shattered under a hail of bullets. The driver slumped forward, hit only by a tranquilizer dart but unconscious. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a small recorder. "If they catch us, they need to think this is the only evidence," she whispered. "I've already sent the real file to a safe location." Before Marcus could respond, the car door was yanked open. A man in a paramedic uniform aimed a tranquilizer gun at them. "Dr. Almeida would like to speak with you," he said with a cold smile. The last thought that flashed through Marcus's mind before the anesthesia took effect was that Isabella had warned them about Maria, but no one had considered the possibility that Dr. Almeida himself might pose an even greater danger. Marcus slowly regained consciousness in what appeared to be a modern office. Through the large windows, he saw the lights of São Paulo twinkling in the evening twilight. He recognized the space. It was Dr. Almeida's private office on the top floor of the Q clinic. "Ah, Mr. Vandenberg, welcome back." The voice came from a distinguished-looking man with gray hair standing by the window. Dr. Victor Almeida turned around, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I apologize for the dramatic way we brought you here, but we needed to be sure you would come." Marcus tried to get up from his chair, but realized his wrists were tied. "Where is Sophia?" "Your ex-wife is in good hands," Almeida smiled. "Maria is taking care of her, just as she took care of your father in his final days." The door opened, and Maria Santos entered, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She was an imposing figure in her lab coat, her face a mask of professional efficiency. "Eduardo is sedated," she reported. "He won't cause any trouble for now." "Excellent." Almeida took a seat behind his desk. "Now we can finally have an honest conversation about Project Phoenix." "There's nothing to discuss," Marcus snapped. "You killed my father." "Killed?" Almeida chuckled briefly. "Your father was a volunteer, Marcus." He believed in our research, in the possibility of combating aging, curing diseases once thought incurable. He was a visionary, just like me. Until he discovered what you were really doing, Marcus countered. I've seen his notes. Ah, yes, his final notes. Almeida stood up and walked to a large safe in the wall. You know, your father wasn't the only one keeping records. He opened the safe and pulled out a thick file. This is the full report of Project Phoenix, including your father's own notes on the ethical implications of our research. Maria took the file and began flipping through it. Alberto was weak, she said bitterly. He lost his nerve when he saw what was needed for real progress. Just like my brother Eduardo. But you, Marcus, she looked at him intently. You're different. You understand that great breakthroughs require sacrifices. The only one who made sacrifices was your husband, Marcus said sharply, and all the other patients you used as guinea pigs. A flash of pain crossed Maria's face, quickly replaced by anger. Robert knew what he was getting into. He believed in science, in progress. His death was a tragic accident, but his sacrifice has brought us closer to a breakthrough than ever before. Enough, Almeida interrupted. We're not here to discuss the past. We're here to secure the future. He turned his computer screen toward Marcus. This is what we've developed with the funding from the Vandenberg Foundation, a treatment that not only slows the aging process, but potentially reverses it. On the screen appeared images of lab, tests, cell regeneration, results that by all scientific standards should have been impossible. Marcus felt his heart race. If this was true, your father would be proud, Almeida said softly. We are on the verge of making history. And you can be part of it, Marcus. All you have to do is sign. He slid a document across his desk, a contract that would permanently bind the Vandenberg Foundation to the clinic, that would drop all legal claims, that would bury the past. Marcus looked at the contract, then at the images on the screen. He thought of his father, of all the people who had been sacrificed for this progress. And he thought of Isabella's last words on the train. Follow the money, she had said, and suddenly he saw it. Marcus stared at the financial data on the POW screen, his trained business eye suddenly picking up something familiar in the apparent chaos of numbers. The cash flows, the timing of investments, the way funds were moved. It formed a pattern he had seen before. You never developed a treatment, he said slowly, his voice filled with disbelief. This entire project, it's a cover for something else. Almeida's smile faded slightly. Maria stiffened beside him. The Vandenberg Foundation wasn't the only one investing in Project Phoenix, Marcus continued. There were other foundations, other wealthy families, all with similar stories. A family member who voluntarily participated in the treatment, followed by blackmail and forced investments. He leaned forward in his chair, his bound hands clenched into fists. But the money never went to research. It disappeared into a complex network of offshore accounts, only to return laundered as legitimate investments in other companies. This was never a medical experiment. It was a massive money laundering operation. Almeida's face tightened. You have a very vivid imagination, Mr. Vandenberg. The images on your screen are fake, Marcus went on. Manipulated data to impress investors. But the real data, he nodded toward the documents in Maria's hands. They tell a different story. My father discovered that too, didn't he? He wasn't just shocked by the ethical issues. He had uncovered the financial fraud. Maria snapped the folder shut with a sharp clap. It doesn't matter what you think you know. You have no proof. Isabella has the proof, Marcus said calmly. That's why she had to disappear. She wasn't just following the medical trail, she was following the money. And now she's sent everything to... He stopped, a sudden realization hitting him like a sledgehammer. To whom? Almeida's voice was threatening. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening. To the one person you would never suspect. The person who has had access to all the financial documents of the Vandenberg Foundation for years. At that moment, the door flew open. Sophia stood in the doorway, but no longer the broken woman from an hour ago. Her posture was upright, her gaze steely. Behind her stood two federal police officers. Sorry it took so long, she said to Marcus. We had to make sure we had all the evidence. Maria reached for her bag, but one of the officers was faster. Maria Santos, he said, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and complicity in unethical medical experiments. As the officers entered the room, Marcus saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Dr. Almeida had pulled a small device from his desk drawer. "See, if I go down," he said grimly, "we all go down." His finger moved toward a red button, but before he could press it, there was a dull thud. Almeida collapsed, and behind him stood Eduardo Santos, holding a heavy microscope in his hands. "That was for Miguel," Eduardo said softly, "and for Robert, and for all the others you used." Sophia rushed to Marcus to untie his restraints. "Isabella has been working with the federal police for months," she explained as she fumbled with the straps. "She needed my help to access the financial documents, but we had to be careful. One wrong move and all the evidence would disappear." "Is that why the separation?" asked Marcus, rubbing his wrists as the handcuffs came off. Sophia nodded. "It had to look real. They had to believe they had control over me." She hesitated for a moment. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner." Marcus shook his head and pulled her into an embrace. "You did exactly what my father would have done. You found the truth." But as the officers led Almeida and Maria away, Marcus knew this wasn't the end yet. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. And somewhere in the city, Isabella was still waiting, holding the final piece of the puzzle that would tie everything together. In the chaos that followed the arrests, Sophia pulled Marcus aside into an empty treatment room. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice tense, "about Isabella." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. Marcus's breath caught. In the photo was a young Isabella, arm in arm with his father. Both were smiling at the camera, with the buildings of the Vandenberg Foundation in the background. "She worked for him," Sophia explained. As an investigative journalist, she had been researching suspicious medical practices for years. Your father hired her to investigate Project Phoenix, even before he became a patient himself. "Why did she never tell me?" "Because she knew she needed you," came a voice from the door. Isabella stood there, pale but determined. "Your father asked me to continue the investigation if anything happened to him, but I needed someone on the inside, someone with access to the right documents." She walked into the room and closed the doctor behind her. "Your father knew something was wrong with the clinic, but he couldn't prove it. Then he discovered the pattern in the finances. He was planning to go to the authorities, but they found out." Marcus finished her sentence. Isabella nodded. "Maria Santos was the one who discovered it. She warned Almeida, and then..." She swallowed hard. "Your father received his final treatment." "But why wait all these years?" Marcus asked. "Why not go to the police sooner?" "Because we wanted the entire network," Sophia replied. "Not just Almeida and Maria, but everyone involved. The bankers laundering the money, the doctors turning a blind eye to the truth, the executives accepting bribes." "And now?" Isabella smiled wearily. "Now we have them. The federal police are conducting raids at 12 different locations as we speak. The network is falling apart." Marcus walked to the window, looking out over the city that had been his home all his life. "There's one thing I still don't understand," he said slowly. "Why did you choose that specific day for the arrests? Why the day of my divorce?" Sophia and Isabella exchanged a glance. "Because we knew Almeida would be at his most vulnerable then," Sophia said. "He was so focused on gaining control of the foundation that he became careless, started making mistakes." "And Miguel?" Marcus turned around. "Why involve him?" "That wasn't planned," Isabella said softly. "Maria tried to blackmail her brother by threatening his son. We had to intervene. It was a risk, but it also gave us the opening we needed." There was a soft knock on the door. Eduardo Santos peeked his head around the corner. "They found Maria's laptop," he said excitedly, "and you'll never believe what's on it." Eduardo opened the laptop on a desk in the clinic's meeting room, his hands trembling with excitement. "Maria kept a journal," he explained as he navigated through the files. "Not just about Project Phoenix, but about everything. She was obsessive in her documentation. On the screen appeared folders with dates going back 5 years. Marcus's heart skipped a beat when he saw the date of his father's last day. Eduardo clicked the folder open. It was never just a money laundering operation, Isabella murmured as she scrolled through the documents. They were indeed conducting research, but not into what they claimed. They were experimenting with memory manipulation. Sophia leaned closer to the screen. Memory manipulation? Look here. Isabella pointed to a document. They developed a method to induce selective amnesia in patients. The treatments were actually experiments to see if they could erase or modify specific memories. Marcus felt sick. Why? Blackmail, Eduardo answered grimly. Think about it. What if you could not only gather evidence against rich and powerful people, but also manipulate their memories of certain events? You could make them believe in a completely different version of the truth. That's insane, Sophia whispered. But it worked, Isabella said. Not perfectly, but well enough. They tested it first on terminally ill patients, people who had nothing left to lose. Then they got more ambitious. Marcus stared at the screen, at the clinical descriptions of procedures and results. My father, was he? He was their first high-profile test, Eduardo confirmed softly. They tried to erase his memories of the financial irregularities, but something went wrong. He opened a video file. Alberto Vandenberg appeared on the screen, sitting in a hospital bed. He spoke confusedly, jumping from one topic to another. But his eyes were clear and focused. He fought it, Isabella said. His mind was stronger than they expected, and during the final procedure, she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus looked away from the screen, his fists clenched. But then he saw something else, a folder labeled Contingency. What's that? Eduardo clicked the folder open. Inside were hundreds of files, all named after prominent figures in Sao Paulo. This is their insurance, he said. Details on everyone. Whoever had dealings with the clinic. Not just the victims, but the accomplices too. Politicians, judges, businessmen. And look at the dates, Sophia noted. Some of these files are from last week. This goes way beyond just Almeida and Maria. Isabella grabbed her phone. I need to warn my contacts at the federal police. This is bigger than we thought. But before she could call, the lights went out. The emergency lighting flickered on, a red glow casting ghostly shadows on the walls. And through the intercom came a mechanical voice. Emergency protocol initiated. All systems locked down. Eduardo jumped up. This is not possible. All systems should have been shut down. Maria, Marcus said grimly. She must have prepared this. A last line of defense. Sophia ran to the door, but it was already locked. A new notification appeared on the laptop. Data transfer initiated. Deletion sequence will commence in 10 minutes. They're trying to erase everything, Isabella said. All the evidence, all the names. Marcus looked at the screen, at the progress bars indicating how their chances of justice were slowly slipping away. But then he saw something, a pattern in the code scrolling across the screen. Eduardo, he said slowly, you said Maria was obsessive with her documentation. Could she have made a backup? An insurance for her insurance? Eduardo's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face tense with concentration. Maria wasn't just obsessive. She was paranoid, he said. She trusted no one, not even Almeida. There must be a backup. The minutes ticked away. On the screen, the deletion sequence showed they had 7 minutes left before everything would disappear. Isabella tried to reach the outside world through her phone, but all signals were blocked. Wait, Sophia said suddenly. Maria's paranoia. It wasn't just digital. She always kept physical copies of everything. Marcus nodded slowly, a memory surfacing. The safe in Almeida's office. There were more documents than just the file he showed us. We can't get to it, Eduardo said in frustration. The entire floor is locked down. Maybe we can. Isabella walked to the window and looked out. We're on the 5th floor. Almeida's office is on the 6th. Marcus followed her gaze to the wide ledge running along the building's facade. That's insane. We have no choice, Isabella said. In 5 minutes, everything will be gone. For all the evidence, all the names, everything your father died for. Sophia grabbed Marcus's arm. There has to be another way. There isn't. He looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, but also the understanding. Eduardo, can you slow down the deletion process? The doctor nodded. Maybe a few minutes, but not much more. That's enough. Marcus took off his jacket and walked to the window. Isabella helped him open it. The wind howled around the building, the ledge glistening wet from a recent rain. Marcus swung his leg over the windowsill, his heart pounding in his throat. 5 floors below, the lights of police cars gleamed. 3 minutes, Eduardo warned. Marcus moved carefully along the ledge, his back pressed against the wall. Every step had to be perfect. He thought of his father, of all the people who had suffered under Almeida's experiments, of Thomas who deserved to know the truth. Almeida's office was lit by emergency lights, a ghostly red glow shining through the windows. The window was locked, of course. Marcus wrapped his shirt around his hand and smashed the glass, ignoring the pain as shards cut his arm. 2 minutes. He climbed inside, ran to the safe. The code. What was the code? Then he remembered something Isabella had said about Maria's obsession. He entered the date of her husband's death. The safe swung open. 1 minute. His hands flew through the documents, papers falling to the floor. There, a black folder labeled Contingency Hard Copy. The red light in the hallway began to flash. Marcus heard the sound of doors unlocking. He ran back to the window, clutching the folder to his chest. The ledge seemed even narrower on the way back, the wind even stronger. But then he heard Sophia's voice encouraging him, saw Isabella's outstretched hand. Just as he climbed back through the window, all the screens went dark. The deletion was complete, but in his hands he held the evidence that Maria had so carefully preserved. Her insurance against betrayal was now their key to the truth. Eduardo studied the documents, while Isabella called her contacts at the federal police. Sophia held Marcus's bloodied hand as a nurse tended to his cuts. "It's all here," Eduardo whispered. "Names, dates, bank accounts, enough to dismantle the entire network." Marcus looked at the folder, at the years of corruption and crime documented within. "My father would be proud," Sophia said softly. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but it's not over yet. This is just the beginning." Through the window, they saw the first rays of sunlight over São Paulo, a new day marking the end of Project Phoenix, and the beginning of the quest for justice for all the victims. The next 48 hours blurred into a haze of police interrogations, press conferences, and endless phone calls. Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of documents from Maria's archive, when Sophia walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "The federal police just made 3 more arrests," she said, handing him a cup. "A Supreme Court judge and 2 bank executives. They were trying to flee the country." Marcus rubbed his tired eyes. How many people were actually involved in this? According to Isabella's latest count, 27 high-ranking figures spread across justice, healthcare, and the financial sector. She hesitated for a moment, and they've found more victims. People who were treated at the clinic but only remember fragments of what really happened. He stared at a photo on his desk, taken on the day he took over his father's company. Alberto Vandenberg beamed with pride beside his son. "We have to help them," he said softly. "All those people who've lost their memories." "Eduardo thinks it's possible," Sophia replied. "Now that they have access to Maria's research data, they might be able to find a way to reverse the effects of the treatments." There was a soft knock at the door. Isabella stood in the doorway, a thick envelope in her hands. "You need to see this," she said, stepping inside and placing the envelope on the desk. From the envelope came photos, letters, and a USB stick. "This just came in from one of my contacts at the federal police," Isabella explained. "They found it in a safe in Maria's apartment." Marcus spread the photos out on his desk. His breath caught. The first photo showed his father in conversation with Maria Santos, years before Project Phoenix began. The next photo showed them together, with a young Eduardo Santos and a few other doctors. "They knew each other," Sophia whispered. Isabella nodded. "Maria and your father worked together on a legitimate research project 15 years ago. a groundbreaking study on regenerative medicine. But then her husband died during one of the experimental treatments. And that changed her, Marcus added. She blamed my father. Not just him, Isabella said, the entire system. She believed the medical world was corrupt, that only drastic measures could bring change. She picked up a letter from the envelope. This is what she wrote 2 days before your confrontation at the clinic. Marcus read the letter, his hands trembling. It was a kind of confession, but also a justification. Maria described how she had waited years for her chance at revenge, how she had slowly climbed the ranks in the medical world, while gathering evidence against everyone she held responsible for her husband's death. She wasn't just after money or power, Sophia said softly. She wanted to dismantle the entire system from within. By making it even more corrupt, Marcus shook his head. By using innocent people as guinea pigs? In her mind, it was justice, Isabella replied. She saw herself as some kind of avenging angel, but somewhere along the way, she stopped when her phone buzzed. After a brief conversation, she looked up, her face pale. What is it? Sophia asked. They just found Maria in her cell, Isabella said quietly. She's in a coma. She applied her own treatment to herself. Marcus stood up abruptly. We need to go to the hospital, now. Why? Sophia asked, surprised. Because she's the only one who knows how we can help the other victims, he answered grimly. And because, despite everything, she's the last link to what really happened to my father. The hospital was a different building from the private clinic, sterile, efficient, without the luxurious facade that Project Phoenix had used to conceal its true nature. Eduardo was waiting for them at the entrance to the intensive care unit, his face marked by fatigue and worry. She's stable, he said as he led them to Maria's room, but we don't know if she'll ever regain consciousness. The treatment she applied to herself. He shook his head. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Through the window they saw Maria lying there, surrounded by beeping monitors. She seemed smaller now, more vulnerable, a far cry from the intimidating figure she had been just days. What was she trying to achieve? Sophia asked softly. According to preliminary tests, she was trying to erase her own memories, Eduardo answered. But not like the other victims. This was more targeted, as if she was trying to isolate and preserve specific memories while erasing the rest. Marcus stared at the motionless figure in the bed. She wanted to back up her mind, a final insurance. Isabella nodded slowly. It would make sense. All those years she collected information, documented everything, but there must have been things she never wrote down, secrets that only existed in her mind. We found her computer, Eduardo said, or what's left of it. She had a special program, running, linked to the equipment she used for the treatment. It recorded her brainwaves, her neural activity. A digital copy of her memories, Sophia whispered. Can we access it? Marcus asked. Eduardo hesitated. Theoretically, yes. The data is intact, but it would be experimental, dangerous. We'd need an interface to interpret the information, and the only one who has that kind of technology. The clinic, Isabella finished his sentence. Marcus walked to the window, looking out over the city, slowly waking up in the early morning. How much risk would it be? Marcus, no, Sophia said resolutely. You can't seriously consider— We need that information, he interrupted her. Not just for the lawsuit, but for all the victims. If there's a way to help them, to give them their memories back. But at what cost? Isabella asked. The technology hasn't been tested, not like this. It could damage your own memories or worse. Eduardo stepped forward. There might be another way. In Maria's apartment, we found notes about a new protocol, something she was working on before all of this happened, a safer method to influence memories. He pulled out his tablet and showed them the technical specifications. It should be possible to build a kind of bridge between her stored memories and a healthy brain without the risk of permanent damage. But we still need someone to volunteer for the procedure, Isabella said. Marcus looked at Maria's motionless form, at the monitors tracking her vital signs. He thought of his father, of all the others who had been used in the clinic's experiments, of the truth still hidden in the digital depths of Maria's mind. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Marcus," Sophia began. "Not alone," he interrupted her. "We do it together. You, me, Eduardo, we've all been part of this story. It's time we end it together too." Isabella grabbed her phone. "I'll arrange a team from the federal police. If we're doing this, we're doing it under strict supervision." Eduardo nodded slowly. "I need 2 days to prepare everything. And Marcus," he looked at him intently, "you need to be absolutely sure. You want to do this. Whatever we find in Maria's memories, there's no going back." "There never was," Marcus replied, his gaze still fixed on Maria. "Not since the day I saved her son from that car." The 2 days that followed were a blur of preparations and tests. Eduardo had assembled a team of trusted specialists under strict oversight from the federal police. The equipment from the clinic had been moved to a secure wing of the hospital, where technicians worked around the clock to implement Maria's protocol. Marcus underwent a series of medical exams, while Sophia and Isabella handled the legal aspects. It would be a precarious operation, technically still experimental, but now under strict ethical guidelines and with every possible safety measure in place. "We found something in Maria's data," Eduardo said on the evening before the procedure. They were in his office, surrounded by computer screens filled with medical data. "It seems she built some kind of anchor into her memories." "An anchor?" Sophia asked. "A specific memory that serves as a starting point," Eduardo explained. "A moment so strong, so clear, that it can act as a fixed point in the chaos of transferred memory." Isabella leaned over one of the screens. "The day Robert died," she said softly. "That must be it." Marcus stared at the graphs showing Maria's brainwaves from that fateful day. "If we start there, can we navigate to other memories?" "Theoretically, yes," Eduardo nodded. "But it won't be easy. You'll be going through her experiences, feeling her emotions. It could be overwhelming." "We don't have a choice," Marcus said firmly. "This is our only chance to understand what really happened, not just to my father, but to all the victims." Sophia took his hand. "You don't have to do this alone." "We discussed that No," he interrupted her. "We decided that you are the backup. If something goes wrong, if I get stuck in Maria's memories, you are the only one who can pull me out." A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A nurse peeked around the corner. "Dr. Santos, Maria's vitals are changing." They hurried to the ICU, where the monitors showed a subtle but clear shift in Maria's brainwaves. "She's fighting," Eduardo murmured. "Somehow she knows what we're planning." "Is that possible?" Isabella asked. "With Maria?" Eduardo shook his head. "I've learned that anything is possible. She was always 3 steps ahead of everyone." Marcus stared at the charts, at the dancing lines that represented Maria's troubled mind. "Maybe she's not fighting," he said slowly. "Maybe she's trying to tell us something." He walked to the bed, looking at the woman who had caused so much pain, but who also held the key to justice for all the victims. "We'll do it tomorrow," he said softly to her. "And I promise you, whatever we find in your memories, we will honor the truth, the whole truth." For a moment, it seemed as though the lines on the monitor responded to his words, a subtle but unmistakable shift in the pattern. Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his study, Thomas entered. His son, who looked so much like his grandfather, met his gaze with the same determined expression that Alberto van den Berg had always had. "Dad," he said softly, "I know you're scared, but Grandpa would be proud of you." Marcus pulled his son into an embrace, his heart full of love, fear, and determination. Tomorrow he would face the darkest secrets of Project Phoenix. But tonight, in this moment, he was simply a father holding his son, grateful for the clarity of his own memories. The operating room was filled with the soft hum of equipment and the steady beeping of monitors. Marcus lay on the treatment table, surrounded by Eduardo's team of specialists. To his left stood Sophia, her hand firmly gripping his. To his right sat Isabella with a laptop, ready to document everything. "We'll start with a light sedation," Eduardo explained, as a nurse connected an IV. "You need to remain conscious enough to experience the memories, but relaxed enough not to resist them." Marcus nodded, his mouth dry. Through a window, he saw the adjacent room where Maria lay, still motionless, but now connected to the same equipment as he was. The technology she had used to manipulate memories would now be used to reveal the truth. "Remember," Eduardo said, as he attached electrodes to Marcus's temples, "whatever you see or feel, it's Maria's memories. Try to observe them without getting lost in them. Sophia's voice will be your anchor to reality." The sedation began to take effect, a warm wave flowing through his body. He heard Sophia's voice, distant but clear. "I'm here. Come back to me." Then Eduardo pressed a button, and the world exploded in light and sound. He was in a hospital room, but not as himself. He was seeing through Maria's eyes, looking at a man in a hospital bed, Robert, her husband. He felt her love for him, her fear, her hope that the experimental treatment would work. The scene shifted. He was in a laboratory looking at test results that promised impossible things. He heard Alberto Vandenberg say, "This could revolutionize medicine, Maria, but we must be careful." More images, faster now. A funeral. Robert's funeral. The overwhelming pain, the anger, the moment when grief turned into obsession, the plan slowly taking shape in her mind. "His heart rate is rising," he heard Eduardo's voice somewhere far away. "Marcus," Sophia's voice, an anchor in the chaos. "Focus on my voice." He saw himself through Maria's eyes, years younger, on the day he took over his father's company. She watched how she observed him, waiting for the right moment. Felt her inner conflict. Was the son responsible for the sins of the father? Then came the memory she had anchored, the day Robert died. But there was more. On the margins of the memory, almost hidden, was a conversation. Robert with Alberto Vandenberg, just before the fatal procedure. "It's too dangerous," Robert said. "We need to shut down the project." "I know," Alberto replied. "I've already contacted the authorities. Tomorrow I'll expose everything." But tomorrow never came. Robert underwent the procedure and died. And Maria, blinded by grief and revenge, saw only what she wanted to see. "His blood pressure is critical," Eduardo's voice urgent now. "Marcus, come back," Sophia's voice, trembling with fear. But there was one more memory. Recent. Maria in her cell, knowing her plan had failed. Her last thoughts before submitting herself to the procedure. "Forgive me, Robert. I got it all so wrong." Marcus felt himself being pulled back to reality, his mind tearing away from Maria's memories. He opened his eyes in the operating room, his face wet with tears. "Alberto tried to stop them," he whispered. "He and Robert. They were working together." Sophia nodded, her eyes also filled with tears. "We know. While you were in Maria's memories, Isabella accessed her final emails. She had discovered the truth just before we arrested her." Marcus turned his head toward the window, where Maria still lay motionless. "All those years of pain and revenge based on a misunderstanding. But now we know the truth," Isabella said softly, "and we can finally bring justice for everyone." Eduardo checked Marcus's vitals. "You need to rest," he said with concern. "The connection to Maria's memories has exhausted you." But Marcus shook his head. "There's no time for rest. We have work to do." He looked at Sophia, at Isabella, at the team that had helped them. "It's time to truly end Project Phoenix. Time to help all the victims heal." The days after the procedure blurred into a haze of activity. Marcus's experience with Maria's memories had not only revealed the truth about the past, but also provided the key to helping other victims. In a secure wing of the hospital, Eduardo began treating the first volunteers. "It's working," he said excitedly to Marcus and Sophia, who had come to check on the progress. "Through your experience in Maria's mind, we've been able to understand how the memory protocol works. We can now reverse it, remove the artificial blocks without damaging the original memories." In one of the treatment rooms sat an elderly man, Mr. Oliveira, once a prominent judge, until Project Phoenix had used him as a test subject. His eyes were clear now, no longer clouded by confusion. "I remember everything," he said softly to Isabella, who was recording his testimony. The conversations with Almeida, the pressure they exerted, the procedures, but also what they tried to hide. The corruption in the justice system went much deeper than just Project Phoenix. Marcus looked through the observation window at the man slowly reclaiming his life. How many others are there? We've identified 27 victims so far, Sophia replied, consulting her tablet. But new reports are still coming in. People who have lived for years with unexplained gaps in their memories are starting to realize they might also be victims. A nurse approached with new test results. Eduardo studied them and smiled. The recovery rates are better than we dared hope. It seems Maria's final protocol, the program she used on herself, was actually designed to restore memories, not erase them. She was trying to make amends, Marcus said softly. But why this way? Why not just tell the truth? Asked Sophia. Isabella, who had just left Mr. Oliveira's room, joined them. According to her last emails, she was afraid no one would believe her. She wanted to leave a way for the truth to reveal itself, undeniable and irrefutable. Marcus thought back to his experience in Maria's memories, to the sorrow and regret he had felt there. She knew her time was up. This was her form of atonement. A sound from the intensive care unit interrupted their conversation. Maria's monitors showed changes in her brainwaves. Eduardo hurried to her room, the others following. "This is new," he murmured as he studied the data. "It seems like..." "She's waking up," Sophia finished his sentence. Maria's eyes moved beneath her closed eyelids, her fingers lightly tugging at the sheets. Eduardo checked her vital signs. "It's possible," he said cautiously. "The last protocol, her own version, maybe it was more than just a backup of her memories." "She's coming back," said Marcus. He looked at the woman who had caused so much pain, but had ultimately also provided the key to healing. "And she will remember everything." Sophia took his hand. "Are you ready for that? For her testimony, for everything that's still to come?" Marcus nodded slowly. "We sought the truth, Sophia, the whole truth. If Maria wakes up, she's not just a perpetrator, but also a witness. And maybe..." He hesitated for a moment. "Maybe also a victim of her own obsession." Isabella's phone vibrated. She read the message and looked up with wide eyes. The federal police just conducted another raid, based on information from Mr. Oliveira's recovered memories. They've exposed an entire network of corrupt officials, people we hadn't even identified yet. "It's not over yet," Sophia said softly. "No," Marcus agreed. "This is just the beginning of the real healing process. Not just for the victims, but for the entire system." Maria's awakening wasn't a dramatic moment like in the movies. It happened gradually over the course of hours. First, movements of her eyes, then her fingers, and finally, late in the afternoon, she opened her eyes. Eduardo was the first to speak to her, carefully testing how much she remembered. To everyone's surprise, her memories were intact, not only from before her self-imposed treatment, but also from the period after. "The protocol worked exactly as I had hoped," she said in a weak voice to Marcus, who was sitting by her bed. "I could see everything, feel everything, even when you were navigating through my memories." "Why?" he asked softly. "Why all of this?" Maria closed her eyes for a moment, visibly struggling with her emotions. "When I finally discovered the truth about Robert and your father, I realized what I had done. How many lives I had destroyed. Because of my blindly vengeful obsession. I couldn't undo it, but I could make sure the truth would come to light. By sacrificing yourself. By transforming myself into living evidence," she corrected him. "The protocol wasn't meant to erase memories, but to preserve them in their purest form, without the distortion of time and emotion. I wanted you to see, to feel, to understand." She was interrupted by the arrival of Isabella and Sophia, who came to report new developments. Judge Oliveira's testimony had caused a domino effect in the highest circles of São Paulo. People were starting to come forward voluntarily, afraid that their own involvement would be revealed by the recovering victims. "The network was larger than we thought," said Isabella. "It reached into the highest levels of government. Project Phoenix was just the tip of the iceberg." Maria nodded weakly. "In my computer, there's an encrypted file. The access code is Robert's date of death, followed by the initials of all the original project members." Sophia's fingers flew across her tablet, entering the code. Her eyes widened as the files opened. This is unbelievable. Detailed documentation of 15 years of corruption and abuse of power. My real life insurance, Maria whispered, not just for myself, but for the truth. Marcus stared at the woman in the hospital bed, emotions churning in his chest. You planned all of this, from the moment you discovered the truth. I needed you, she admitted. You, Sophia, Isabella, you were the only ones I could trust to see this through, to seek not just revenge, but justice. Eduardo entered with new test results. The other patients are responding excellently to the treatment. Their memories are returning, without the traumas we feared. It seems the human brain is remarkably resilient and capable of forgiveness, Maria added softly, her eyes fixed on Marcus. He felt Sophia's hand on his shoulder, heard Isabella's. Pen scratching on her notepad, saw Eduardo's concerned gaze. This was the moment when everything came together: revenge and forgiveness, justice and healing, truth and reconciliation. We still have a long way to go, he finally said, but we'll walk it together, all of us. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Robert would have wanted that, and your father too. Outside the hospital, the sun began to set over São Paulo, the city that had hidden so many secrets and was now slowly beginning to heal. In the distance, sirens sounded. More raids, more arrests, more truth coming to light. It was, as Marcus had said, only the beginning. But for the first time since that fateful day when he had saved a baby from a hot car, he felt they were on the right path. Not toward revenge or retribution, but toward something far more important: restoration. The following weeks unfolded like an avalanche of revelations. Isabella's articles on Project Phoenix appeared in international media, while federal police made daily arrests. The web of corruption Maria had exposed reached into the highest echelons of Brazilian society. Marcus sat in his renovated office at the Vandenberg Foundation, now transformed into a center for victim support and medical ethical research. Sophia was beside him, reviewing new applications from potential victims. 3 more people have come forward, she said, flipping through the forms. Their stories align with what we already know about the experimental treatments. Eduardo thinks they're good candidates for the recovery program. Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on a photo of his father that now had a new place on his desk. How many is that in total? 42 confirmed cases, Sophia replied, and another 16 we're investigating. It's becoming clearer just how extensive Project Phoenix really was. There was a soft knock at the door. Isabella entered, followed by Eduardo. Their faces were serious. We found something in Maria's archive, Isabella said, placing a folder on Marcus's desk. Something that explains why your father was so determined to stop the project. Eduardo took over. Alberto had discovered that Almeida was experimenting with combining different memory protocols. He wasn't just trying to erase or manipulate memories, but to implant new ones. False memories? Sophia asked, shocked. Isabella nodded. It explains why some victims remembered events that never happened. Almeida used this technique to manipulate people, to make them believe in things that never occurred. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. And my father discovered this. More than that, Eduardo said. He found evidence that Almeida planned to sell this technology to the highest bidder. Foreign powers, private military companies. The implications were horrifying. That's why he had to be stopped, Sophia whispered. At that moment, Maria's nurse entered the office. Apologies for the interruption, but Mrs. Santos is asking to speak with you, Mr. Vandenberg. She says it's urgent. Marcus exchanged a glance with the others and stood up. In the week since she had awakened, Maria's recovery had been progressing smoothly, both physically and mentally. Her cooperation with the authorities had been invaluable to the investigation. They found her sitting in her hospital bed, surrounded by papers and a laptop. Despite her weakened state, she exuded an intense focus. I remember more, she said, without preamble. Details I had missed before, connections that are now becoming clear. There was someone else, someone we overlooked. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Almeida had a partner, someone who funded him before Project Phoenix even began, someone who operated from the shadows. She turned her laptop around. Look! On the screen appeared a series of bank statements dating back to before the project's inception. Enormous sums transferred from accounts abroad. This person, Maria continued, was obsessed with the idea of memory manipulation, not for money or power, but out of pure scientific curiosity. A brilliant but dangerous mind who believed that human consciousness could be reprogrammed like a computer. Isabella leaned over the laptop, her journalistic instincts sharp. These transactions, they all come from the same source. A company called Nexus Innovations. A front company, Maria said, set up by someone you all know very well, someone who has been operating right under our noses. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he saw the name at the bottom of the document, a name that changed everything they thought they knew about Project Phoenix. Dr. Elena Visser, Sophia read aloud, head of the research team that developed the original memory protocol at the University of São Paulo. And my mentor, Eduardo added softly. His face had turned ashen. She was the one who introduced me to the project, who recommended I work with Almeida. Marcus remembered the elegant woman he had met several times at medical conferences. She was known as a pioneer in neuroscience research, respected in academic circles worldwide. She used all of us, Maria said. Almeida was nothing more than her enforcer. I was a pawn in her game. She wanted to see how far she could go with manipulating human memories, and we gave her the perfect laboratory. Isabella was already on E, the phone with her contacts at the federal police. She must still be in São Paulo, she said, holding her hand over the receiver. According to her university schedule, she's giving a lecture this afternoon on ethics in medical research. The irony, Sophia muttered. Marcus stood up. We have to stop her before she hears about this and disappears. All the evidence, all the progress we've made in helping the victims. Wait, Maria interrupted him. There's more. Elena's research, it went further than even Almeida knew. She developed a way not just to manipulate individual memories, but to reprogram entire personality structures. The implications were staggering. Eduardo sank into a chair. That's why the recovery protocol worked so well, he whispered. It was based on her original research. We need her expertise, Sophia said suddenly, to help all the victims, to make sure the treatments don't have unforeseen side effects. But she's a monster, Isabella protested. She is a scientist who went too far, Maria corrected, just like me. The difference is that she never stopped, never questioned the ethics of what she was doing. Marcus walked to the window, gazing out at the university campus, visible in the distance. Somewhere out there was Elena Visser, likely at this very moment lecturing to a new generation of doctors and researchers. We'll handle this differently, he finally said. No arrest, no scandal, not yet. The others looked at him questioningly. She has knowledge we need, he explained, and she has connections we don't yet know about. If we arrest her now, all of that disappears. What are you suggesting? Asked Isabella. We use her own methods against her, Marcus replied. We let her think she's still in control, that her involvement in Project Phoenix remains hidden. Meanwhile, we gather more evidence, identify her network. A dangerous game, Maria warned. But the only game we can play, said Sophia, understanding where Marcus was heading. We need all her research, all her knowledge, to ensure that all the victims can fully recover. Eduardo stood up. I can reach out to her, she still trusts me. Isabella nodded slowly. And I can write an article that reassures her, suggesting the investigation is focused on Almeida and Maria. While we, Marcus continued, slowly close the net around her. Not out of revenge, but because it's the only way to truly bring this case to a close, to make sure something like this can never happen again. They all looked at Maria, who was still sitting in her hospital bed. She smiled weakly. You gave me a second chance, she said. Maybe Eleanor deserves one too. But first, she has to be stopped. Marcus looked back at the university in the distance. A new phase in their fight had begun, and this time they wouldn't rest until the last shadows of Project Phoenix were eradicated. The large lecture hall of the university was filled with students and scientists, or listening breathlessly to Dr. Elena Visser. She stood on the stage, elegant and confident, speaking about the ethical boundaries of neuroscientific research, with a conviction that was almost hypnotic. Marcus and Sophia sat at the back of the hall, inconspicuous among the audience. Eduardo had smuggled them in under the guise of potential investors in new research. As they listened to Elena's talk about the necessity of ethical guidelines in medical research, Marcus felt his stomach twist with irony. "And that is why we must always prioritize human dignity," Elena concluded her lecture. "Science without ethics is not only dangerous, it is a betrayal of everything we stand for." The applause was deafening. Students stood to congratulate. Her young researchers crowded to catch her attention. She handled it all with grace and a modest smile that Marcus now recognized as a perfect mask. "She's brilliant," Sophia whispered, in a terrifying way. Eduardo walked over to them, his face a mix of admiration and disgust. "She mentored me for years," he said softly. "I thought I knew her." As the hall slowly emptied, Eduardo introduced them to his mentor. Elena's handshake was warm and firm, her smile calculating but not unfriendly. "Ah, Mr. Vandenberg," she said, her voice like honey. "I've read much about you in the papers. Your fight to uncover the truth behind Project Phoenix is admirable." Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine at the way she pronounced the word truth. "I'm doing what my father would have done," he replied calmly. "Ah, yes, Alberto, a brilliant man. His loss was a tragedy for the scientific community." She looked at him piercingly. "I understand that you are continuing his work through the Foundation." "In a different way," Sophia interjected. "We are now focusing on helping victims of unethical medical experiments." For a fraction of a second, Elena's eyes narrowed, but her smile remained perfect. "A noble goal. Perhaps we could collaborate? My expertise could be valuable in the recovery of these individuals." It was exactly what they had hoped for. Eduardo had been right. Elena's ego wouldn't allow her to stay on the sidelines while others used her work. "That would be wonderful," Marcus said. "We do indeed need expertise in refining the recovery protocols." At that moment, all the phones in the room vibrated simultaneously. Breaking news. Isabella's article had been published. Marcus watched as Elena read the message, her face expressionless but her fingers tightening slightly around her phone. "Terrible," she said, looking up. "That poor Maria Santos. Such a brilliant mind, consumed by revenge and obsession. And Almeida, I never thought he was capable of something like this." "We live in troubling times," Sophia said. "All the more reason for people like you to keep fighting for ethics in science." Elena's smile widened. "Indeed. Shall we go somewhere for a drink? I'd love to hear more about your work with the victims." As they left the lecture hall, Marcus caught a glimpse of Isabella discreetly taking photos from a corner of the building. The game had begun. Elena thought she was manipulating them, while she was slowly but surely walking into their web. But when Elena turned and looked at him, Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him doubt. A sharpness, an intelligence that suggested she might be playing a game of her own, and he wondered who was really manipulating whom. In a quiet cafe not far from the university, a subtle but intense psychological chess match unfolded. Elena. Visser sat across from Marcus and Sophia, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. Eduardo was strategically positioned at a nearby table, seemingly engrossed in research papers. "Your work with the recovery protocols is fascinating," Elena said, stirring her espresso. "But I wonder if you realize just how complex human memory truly is. One wrong adjustment and—" She let the sentence hang meaningfully. "That's why we need your expertise," Sophia replied. "Maria's protocol works, but we want to be sure of the long-term effects." The corners of Elena's mouth curled slightly. "Ah, Maria. She was always talented at adapting existing techniques. But innovation, that's another story." Marcus caught the subtle hint in her words. She wanted them to know that she was the original architect without saying it outright. "The protocol seems based on prior research," he said carefully. "All. Science builds on what came before," Elena replied smoothly. "But tell me, how is Maria responding to her treatment?" "She's recovering well," Sophia said. Her memories are intact. All of them. Elena's tone was casual, but her gaze was intense. At that moment, Isabella walked into the cafe, seemingly by chance. She pretended to be surprised to see them and approached their table. "Dr. Visser, what a coincidence. I was just about to call you for a follow-up interview on the ethical implications of the Project Phoenix scandal." Elena's smile widened, but her eyes betrayed a flash of irritation. "Of course, the scientific community must learn from this events." "Indeed," said Isabella, pulling out her notebook. "What do you think, for example, of the suggestion that the technology behind Project Phoenix was developed years before its official launch? It was a bold move, but they needed to know how Elena would react." The professor hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Interesting theory, but without evidence it remains speculation." "There are rumors about an early research project at the university," Isabella continued, "led by a brilliant but controversial scientist." Elena's hand tightened around her cup. "Rumors are dangerous, Miss Rocha. They can destroy careers, ruin lives, as we've seen with Project Phoenix." The threat in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus noticed Sophia's hand moving under the table toward her phone, ready to signal. The federal agents waiting outside, but Elena wasn't finished. "You know," she said, turning back to Marcus, "your father and I once had an interesting conversation about the ethics of memory manipulation. He was concerned about the potential applications." Marcus felt his heart race. This wasn't a casual remark. It was a warning. She was letting them know she knew more about his father's death than they had suspected. "My father was a man of strong principles," he said calmly. "Yes," Elena smiled, "until the very end." She stood up, her movements graceful and controlled. "This has been a fascinating conversation. I look forward to collaborating on the recovery of the victims. But now, unfortunately, I must leave. I have an important video conference to attend." As she walked away, she leaned in toward Marcus once more. "You know," she whispered, "memories are like mirrors. Sometimes they don't show us what was there, but what we want to see. Think about that." After her departure, a tense silence lingered. Eduardo sat down with them, his face concerned. "She knows we're watching her." "No," Marcus said slowly. "She wants us to think she knows. This is all part of her game." "But what game?" Sophia asked. Isabella checked her phone. "The agent's report." That she went straight to her office. "All systems are operational, all surveillance equipment is working." Marcus stared at Elena's empty cup. "We need to be careful. She's not just the architect of Project Phoenix, she's the architect of manipulation itself. And I have a feeling she just made her first move in a game whose rules we don't yet understand." In the secure command center, set up on an abandoned floor of the hospital, Marcus and his team listened to the recordings from Elena's office. After their meeting at the cafe, she had spent hours on the phone, conducting conversations in various languages with people around the world. "She's preparing something," Isabella said, taking notes on the conversations they could understand. "These calls, they're not normal academic contacts." Sophia, tracking financial transactions on her screen, nodded. "There's movement in Nexus Innovations accounts, large sums being transferred to offshore accounts." "She's covering her tracks," Eduardo suggested. "No," Marcus said slowly. "She's showing us exactly what she wants us to see." He pointed to a pattern in the transactions. "To look, these transfers are too obvious, too easy to follow. It's like—" He was interrupted by Maria, who was wheeled into the center by a nurse. Her recovery was progressing steadily, and her insights had become indispensable. "It's a diversion," she said, studying the screens. "Elena has been doing this for years. She creates visible patterns to hide the real movements." "What do you mean?" asked Sophia. Maria gestured toward one of the screens. "These phone calls, these transactions, it's all theater. The real work is happening somewhere else. Elena taught me this when I was still her student, how to make people focus on what they expect to see." Isabella's phone buzzed. She read the message, and her face paled. She just sent out a press release. She's announcing a breakthrough in treating traumatic memories. She's going to give a demonstration tomorrow at an emergency conference. "That's insane," said Eduardo. She can't just... She can, Maria interrupted him. Think about it. Who would stop her? She's still a respected scientist. No one outside this room knows about her involvement in Project Phoenix. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city as it slowly sank into the evening twilight. This is her masterstroke, by stepping forward publicly with a legitimate version of the technology. She makes it impossible to accuse her later, Sophia finished his thought. She's rewriting history before we can expose her. There's more, Maria said, opening a document on her screen. I just gained access to her research protocols. The breakthrough she wants to demonstrate, it's a modified version of the original Project Phoenix protocol. But that's too dangerous, protested Eduardo. We know what it does to people. She knows that too, Marcus said grimly. This isn't a demonstration, it's a threat. She's showing us what she can do if we corner her. Isabella scrolled through the press release. She already has 3 volunteers for the demonstration, prominent figures who claim they want to be rid of traumatic memories. Or people she's pressured, Sophia suggested. Maria's eyes widened as she saw the names. These people, they were all involved in the original project. They must be under her control. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. She's going to do it again, openly this time, and we can't stop her without exposing ourselves. Maybe we don't have to, Maria said suddenly. She turned her wheelchair toward the computers and began typing rapidly. There's something Elena never taught me, something I discovered on my own while researching how to reverse the memory protocols. The others watched as her fingers flew across the keyboard, codes and diagrams appearing on the screens. Every protocol has a weakness, she continued, a point where the manipulation can be broken. We don't need to stop her demonstration. We can use her own technology against her. Marcus leaned forward, studying the complex formulas on the screen. You want to reverse her own protocol during the demonstration? Maria nodded, a grim smile on her face. Exactly. But we'll need help from someone who can get close enough to her during the demonstration. All eyes in the room turned to Eduardo. He swallowed hard but then nodded. She still trusts me, or thinks she can manipulate me. It's dangerous, Sophia warned. Everything is dangerous when Elena is involved, Marcus said. But this is our chance. Our only chance. The conference hall of the São Paulo Medical Center was packed to the last seat. Journalists, scientists, and medical professionals crowded in to witness what had been announced as a revolutionary breakthrough in neuroscience research. Marcus sat among the audience, outwardly calm but inwardly tense. Sophia was seated a few rows behind him, while Isabella was positioned with the press. Their plan was risky, but it was their best chance to stop Elena without the truth about Project Phoenix coming to light. Eduardo stood on the stage next to his mentor, his face a mask of professional interest as Elena prepared her presentation. The 3 volunteers sat in comfortable chairs, connected to what Elena had described as non-invasive neural interfaces. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, her voice warm and convincing. Today we stand on the brink of a new era in the treatment of traumatic memories. What you are about to see is the result of years of ethically conducted research. Marcus felt his stomach tighten at the word ethical. Through his earpiece, he heard Maria's voice from the command center. The interfaces are active. Eduardo needs to upload the modified protocols now. On stage, Eduardo subtly moved toward the main computer, seemingly to check some settings. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering what Maria had taught him. Elena was in her element, explaining how her technology could isolate and restructure specific traumatic memories. Observe, please, she said, turning to the first volunteer. This man has suffered for years from the memory of a tragic accident. With one simple treatment, she pressed a button, and the man stiffened momentarily. Then he relaxed and smiled. The memory, it's still there, but the pain is gone. It feels different. The audience responded with fascinated murmurs. Elena smiled triumphantly and was about to proceed with the next demonstration when something unexpected happened. The first volunteer began to speak, his voice monotone but clear. Project Phoenix. Phase 1, Test Subject 23, Treatment successfully applied under the supervision of Dr. Elena Visser. Elena's smile froze. She tried to interrupt him, but the man continued. Memory modification carried out according to Protocol A7, resulting in complete reprogramming of target memories. The other volunteers also began to speak, their voices blending into a cacophony of technical details and dates. These weren't random statements, they were the exact protocols and procedures of Project Phoenix. A technical glitch, Elena said, smoothly, though her voice trembled slightly. We'll take a short break. There's no glitch, Elena, Eduardo said firmly. The protocols are working exactly as they should. They're bringing the truth to light. The audience grew restless. Journalists typed furiously on their phones, cameras zoomed in. Elena's eyes darted across the room, stopping at Marcus. For a moment, he saw something in her gaze, not fear, but a kind of grim acknowledgement. She straightened her back, her demeanor shifting from the warm scientist to something colder, more dangerous. "Interesting move, Mr. Vandenberg," she said into the microphone, "but you're forgetting one thing." Her hand moved toward a small remote in her pocket. "I always have a backup plan." Before anyone could react, she pressed a button. The lights in the hall flickered, and suddenly all the screens in the room began flashing with a complex series of patterns. "Maria!" Marcus shouted into his earpiece. "What's happening?" "She's activating a mass memory protocol," came the panicked reply. "She's trying to erase everyone's memory of this demonstration." In the chaos that followed, Marcus saw Eleanor moving toward the exit. But she hadn't counted on Sophia, who blocked her path. "It's over, Elena," Sophia said calmly. "The federal police have recorded everything from the outside." For the first time, Marcus saw raw emotion on Elena's face, not the carefully controlled expressions she always showed, but real, unfiltered emotion. "You don't understand," she whispered. "What I'm doing is necessary. The human mind is too fragile, too unreliable. I'm trying to perfect it." "By destroying it?" asked Marcus, who now stood beside Sophia. Elena laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "By freeing it, from pain, from trauma, from the chains of the past. I offer control, perfection. You offer a lie," Eduardo interrupted her, "and now it's time for the truth." The flashing screens in the conference hall slowly faded as Maria's counter-program took effect. The attendees, momentarily dazed by Elena's attempt at mass memory manipulation, began to regain their senses. But Elena still stood by the exit, her hand now on a second device. "Do you think you've won?" Her voice was icy calm. "This was just one demonstration. My work is already spread across the world. Dozens of clinics, hundreds of doctors using my protocols without even knowing it." "We know," said Marcus. "We've traced all your contacts, exposed all your networks." Isabella stepped forward, holding up her phone. "As we speak, raids are being conducted at 17 different facilities worldwide. Your entire network is falling apart, Dr. Visser." For a fraction of a second, Eleanor's face showed a glimpse of fear, quickly masked by her usual composed smile. "And what do you think you'll find? Papers? Computers? Everything that truly matters?" She tapped her temple. "Eyes here." "That's correct," Maria's voice echoed through the hall speakers. She was present via video link from the command center. "And that's exactly why we adapted your own protocol." Elena's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "While you were trying to erase everyone's memories," Eduardo explained, "our counter-program activated a deeper protocol, one we developed based on your own research." "Impossible," Elena whispered. "No one understands my work well enough to—" "I do," Maria interrupted her. "I wasn't just your student, Elena. I was your best student. And while you taught me how to manipulate memories, I learned how to free them." Sophia took a step forward. "The people in this room, your so-called volunteers, their real memories are now returning. Not just from today, but from everything you made them forget." As if on command, one of the volunteers began to speak. His voice now clearer, more confident. "January 2019, first test of Project Phoenix. Dr. Visser personally supervised the memory modifications. We were forced to sign—" A second voice joined him, then a third. Their cacophony of revelations, each detail a new nail in the coffin of Elena's carefully constructed lies. Elena's hand moved toward the device in her pocket, but Marcus was faster. With one swift motion, he snatched it from her hand. "Enough," he said softly. "Enough manipulation. Enough lies." "You don't understand," Elena said, genuine emotion in her voice for the first time. "I was trying to help people. The human mind is so fragile, so full of pain and trauma. I could fix it, perfect it." "By robbing them of their free will, did you?" asked Sophia. "By deciding which memories they were allowed to keep." "Free will?" Elena laughed bitterly. "We are all prisoners of our memories, of our traumas. I offered liberation." "No," Marcus said calmly. "You offered control. Your control." At that moment, the doors burst open and a team of federal agents flooded into the room. Eleanor looked around, watching her carefully constructed world crumble, and for the first time they saw something different in her eyes. Not the cool calculation of a scientist, but the wild gaze of someone losing everything. She turned to Eduardo, her last lifeline. "You were always my best student after Maria. You understand why this was necessary, don't you?" Eduardo slowly shook his head. "I used to understand. I admired you, wanted to be like you. But now I see what that ambition has done to you, what it has made you." As the agents closed in, Elena straightened her back. Until the very end, she remained the proud scientist. "You think this is the end?" she asked Marcus. "This is only the beginning. The world will see that I was right. The human mind needs guidance, control." "No, Elena," Maria interrupted via the video link. "The human mind needs freedom, and we are giving it back now." In the weeks following Elena's arrest, a global process of recovery and revelation unfolded. The command center at the hospital became a hub of activity, where Maria and Eduardo worked together to reverse Elena's protocols and help victims reclaim their true memories. Marcus sat in his office at the Vandenberg Foundation, overlooking the city slowly illuminated by the rising sun. Sophia entered with 2 cups of coffee and the morning newspapers. "The last facility was dismantled yesterday," she said, handing him a newspaper. "A private clinic in Zurich. They were using Elena's protocols to treat wealthy clients for unwanted memories." Marcus shook his head. "How many people were affected in total?" "According to the latest counts, more than 300 direct victims," Sophia replied. "But the indirect effect, families, friends, entire communities that were manipulated." They were interrupted by Isabella entering with her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, opening the device. "Eleanor has made a statement from prison." On the screen appeared the face of the once proud scientist. She looked older, wearier, but her eyes still held that intense gaze. "My work was important," she said into the camera. "Humanity is not ready for the truth about how fragile our minds are, how easily manipulated. I tried to protect us from ourselves." Marcus muted the sound. "Even now she's trying to justify her actions. She truly believes she was doing good," Maria's voice said. "She was connected via video chat from the recovery center. That's the most dangerous kind of conviction, when someone is so certain of their own righteousness that they cross all ethical boundaries." "How are the recovery treatments going?" asked Sophia. Maria's face lit up. "Better than we dared to hope. Reversing the protocols is delicate work, but the results are remarkable. People aren't just getting their memories back, they seem to be growing stronger." "Stronger?" asked Isabella. "It's as if breaking free from the manipulation has made them more resilient," Eduardo explained, appearing next to Maria on the screen. "They are now aware of how precious their memories are, how important it is to protect their own minds." Marcus stood up and walked to the wall where a new photo now hung, his father alongside the original research team, including a young Elena Visser. "We still haven't uncovered everything, have we? About why she really started this, why she became so obsessed." "Maybe we don't need to know," Sophia said softly. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." "What matters is what we do now," Maria added. "The foundation, your new ethical neuroscience research guidelines, that's the real legacy that comes out of all this." Isabella nodded. And the truth, it can finally be told now. Marcus turned to his team, these people who had been through so much to uncover the truth and bring justice. We still have a lot of work to do, he said, but for the first time since my father, since everything began, I feel like we're on the right path. Sophia took his hand. We're not there yet, she said with a small smile, but we're closer than ever. Outside the window, São Paulo stretched out under the morning sun, a city slowly awakening from a long nightmare of manipulated truths and stolen memories. And in the recovery center, a new day of healing began, of reclaiming lost moments, of rebuilding lives that had been shattered by the ambition of one brilliant but misguided mind. It was, as Marcus had said, just the beginning. But it was a beginning rooted in truth, in ethics, in respect for the human mind in all its complexity and fragility. And that, ultimately, was the greatest victory of all. A month after Eleanor's arrest, Marcus found himself in the university archives, searching through old research documents with Isabella. They had finally been granted permission to study. Eleanor's early work, searching for the moment when brilliant science had turned into dangerous obsession. Look here, Isabella said, lifting a yellowed notebook. This is from 15 years ago, when she was still working with your father. Marcus carefully took the notebook. The pages were filled with Eleanor's neat handwriting, diagrams and formulas that would form the foundation of what would later become Project Phoenix. But among the technical notes he found something else, personal entries that offered a glimpse of the woman behind the scientist. She had a daughter, he whispered, reading a passage. Sarah. She suffered from traumatic memories after an accident. Elena tried to help her. Sophia, who had just entered with new documents, stopped in her tracks. A daughter? There's nothing about that in her official records. There's more here, Isabella said, flipping through other papers. Sarah didn't respond well to conventional therapy. Elena began experimenting with new treatment methods, initially just focused on easing traumatic memories. But it didn't work. Marcus finished reading further in the notebook. Sarah's condition worsened, and then he stopped, his throat suddenly dry. What happened? Sophia asked softly. She disappeared. Maria's voice came from the doorway. She wheeled her chair into the archive room. Sarah vanished without a trace, and with her the Elena we knew disappeared too. The brilliant but ethical scientist became a woman driven by an obsession to control the human mind. You knew about this? Marcus asked. Maria nodded slowly. I discovered it during my own research years ago, but by then Elena was already too far gone, too convinced of her mission to perfect the human mind. Eduardo also entered, his face serious. We just received the latest results from the recovery protocol. All the victims are responding positively, but there's something unexpected. What do you mean? Sophia asked. Their restored memories, Eduardo said. They are not only brighter but also more complete, as if Elena's manipulation unintentionally uncovered a deeper layer of memory. Marcus thought of his own experience in Maria's memories, of the intensity and clarity of those moments. Human memory is more complex than we thought, he said slowly. Elena sought control, perfection, but instead found something far more fundamental. The power of authentic memories, Maria nodded. Even if they are painful, even if they hurt us, they make us who we are. Isabella's phone vibrated. She read the message and looked up with wide eyes. They found Sarah. The silence in the room was deafening. Where? Marcus finally asked. In a monastery in the mountains of Peru. She's been living there for years under a different name. And... Isabella hesitated. She wants to see her mother. Sophia took Marcus's hand. What are we going to do? He looked at the notebook in his hands, at the words of a mother who had given up everything in a desperate attempt to help her daughter. We give her that chance, he said softly. Elena has done terrible things, but maybe this confrontation can finally give her the peace she sought. It could be dangerous, Eduardo warned. Everything in life that truly matters carries risks, Maria said. That's exactly what Elena never understood. She wanted to eliminate all risks, remove all pain, but in doing so, she also eliminated what makes us human. Marcus stood up, his decision made. "Arrange the meeting," he told Isabella, "but on our terms with all necessary precautions. It's time to close this circle." As the others discussed the practical details, Marcus continued flipping through Eleanor's notebook. On the last page, he found a single sentence written in a moment of rare vulnerability. "Forgive me, Sarah. Everything I did for you." The meeting was arranged in a secure hospital room. Eleanor, under strict supervision, sat at a simple table when Sarah entered. The young woman, dressed in simple monastic clothing, exuded a calm that stood in stark contrast to her mother's intense energy. Marcus, Sophia, and the others observed from behind a one-way mirror, their hearts pounding in their throats. This was more than a reunion. It was a confrontation with the core of everything that had happened. "Sarah," Eleanor whispered, her usual composure faltering at the sight of her daughter. You've changed so much." "So have you, Mom," Sarah replied softly. Her voice carried a slight accent, the result of years in Peru. "I've read about what you've done, about Project Phoenix." Elena's hands trembled slightly. "I did it for you. The pain you were in, the traumas, and I couldn't bear it. I wanted to help you. By destroying other people's lives." Sarah's voice wasn't accusatory, but rather sorrowful. "By stealing their memories." "You don't understand," Elena said urgently. "I had found the key to freeing the human mind from pain, from trauma. If you had stayed—" "That's exactly why I ran," Sarah interrupted, "because I saw what your obsession was doing to you, to both of us." Behind the glass, Marcus felt Sophia's hand seeking his. This was the moment when everything came together, the personal tragedy that had led to a much larger one. "In the monastery," Sarah continued, "I learned that memories, even painful ones, are part of who we are. Removing or manipulating them is not healing, it is mutilation of the soul." Elena shook her head. "That's too simplistic. The science I developed was brilliant," Sarah admitted. "But you used it to harm people, not to help them. You were so focused on erasing pain that you forgot what it means to be human." In the observation room, Maria whispered, "This is what Eleanor never wanted to see, that her attempt to protect Sarah from pain ultimately led to the greatest loss of all." Elena's shoulders slumped. For the first time, they didn't see her as the brilliant scientist or the manipulative genius, but as a broken mother who had lost everything in her desperate attempt to protect her child. "I miss you every day," she said softly. "Every experiment, every breakthrough, it was all an attempt to return to the moment before I lost you." Sarah stood up and walked around the table. To everyone's surprise, she placed her hand on Elena's shoulder. "You didn't lose me, Mom. I chose a different path, and maybe it's time you did too." Elena looked up at her daughter, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "Isn't it too late for that?" "It's never too late for the truth," Sarah said, "or for forgiveness, but first, you have to accept what you've done, not as a scientist, not as someone trying to improve the world, but as a human being who made mistakes." A charged silence filled the observation room. Marcus thought of his own father, of all the victims of Project Phoenix, of the long road to recovery that still lay ahead. "This is the turning point," Sophia said softly. "Not the arrest, not the revelations, but this moment of truth between mother and daughter." Isabella took notes, but for the first time not as a journalist. "Some stories," she whispered, "are too personal, too sacred to publish." They watched as Eleanor and Sarah finally, after 15 years, embraced. It wasn't a happy ending. Too much had happened. Too much pain had been caused for a simple, and they lived happily ever after. But it was a beginning of understanding, of healing, of the long road back to humanity. A year after the dismantling of Project Phoenix, Marcus stood before a room full of international scientists and ethicists. The Vandenberg Foundation was hosting its first global conference on ethics in neuroscientific research, and the turnout exceeded all expectations. "The human mind," he began his speech, "is not a code to be cracked, not a system to be perfected. It is a delicate fabric of memories, experiences, and emotions that makes us who we are. In the audience sat Sophia, now overseeing the daily operations of the foundation. Beside her was Maria, fully recovered and dedicated to developing ethical treatment methods for trauma patients. Eduardo led a new research department focused on understanding and protecting human memory. Over the past year, we have been able to help more than 400 victims of unethical memory manipulation, Marcus continued, not by taking away their pain or altering their memories, but by helping them reclaim their own truth. Isabella, sitting at the back of the room, took notes as always. Her articles on Project Phoenix had earned her a Pulitzer nomination, but she had chosen to continue her research into ethics in the medical field. But today we are not here just to look back, Marcus said. We are here to look forward, to ensure that science is never again abused as it was during Project Phoenix. He gestured to a large screen displaying various faces, the victims who had agreed to share their stories. Among them was the face of his father, Alberto van den Berg, whose early warnings about the dangers of uncontrolled memory research had finally been heard. These people, he continued, his voice filled with emotion, have taught us that true healing does not come from erasing pain, but from accepting our full history, including the difficult moments. In a secure wing of the hospital, Elena Visser watched the live stream of the conference. Beside her sat Sarah, who regularly traveled from Peru to visit her mother. Elena's trial had resulted in a long prison sentence, but her cooperation in Minon's, helping the victims, and her openness about her motives had led to an arrangement where she could work under strict supervision to repair the damage she had caused. And that is why the Vandenberg Foundation today announces a new initiative, Marcus said, a global network of centers for ethical neuroscientific research. Centers where science and humanity go hand in hand, where progress never comes at the cost of individual dignity. Sophia stood up and joined him on the stage. Together they unveiled the details of the project, an ambitious plan to turn the lessons of Project Phoenix into positive change. But most importantly, Marcus concluded, we must never forget why we are doing this. Not for fame, not for progress, but for the people, for their stories, their memories, their truth. After the presentation, a small private gathering took place in Marcus's office. Maria presented the latest research findings from the recovery program, which showed that the victims had not only regained their memories, but had also grown stronger through the experience. The human brain, she said, turns out to be far more resilient than we thought. Where Elena tried to control it, we have learned to trust it. Eduardo nodded. The new protocols we developed, based on respect for the brain's natural healing properties, are showing better results than we ever thought possible. And Elena? Isabella asked softly. She's cooperating, Sophia replied. Her insights, now used for good, are helping us repair the damage she caused. It's a form of redemption, I think. Marcus walked to the window, looking out over the city. That had seen so much change. We can't change the past, he said, but we can ensure the future looks different. The sun set over São Paulo as Marcus walked through the halls of the recovery center for the last time that day. It had been exactly a year since he made that first crucial decision to stop and listen to the cry of a baby in a hot car. In the common room, a group of former victims of Project Phoenix sat in a therapy session. Their faces were no longer marked by confusion and fear, but by the peace that comes with rediscovering oneself. Your father would be proud, Sophia said, standing beside him, not just for what you've achieved, but for how you've done it. Marcus smiled. We did it together, all of us. In her office, Maria was bent over new research data. Her role as lead researcher of the recovery program had finally brought her the fulfillment she had long sought. The final tests are in, she said, looking up. It seems the positive effects of the recovery program are lasting. Eduardo entered with more good news. The international medical community has accepted our new ethical guidelines. From now on, all neuroscientific research will have to meet these standards. Isabella, who had just returned from an interview with one of the recovered patients, joined them. The stories these people can now tell, she said, are more powerful than any scientific breakthrough. They show that there is always hope, always a way back. They walked together to the rooftop terrace, where the last rays of sunlight bathed the city in gold. Here, in this place where Project Phoenix had once been born out of a mother's desperation, a beacon of hope and recovery had now risen. "Do you know what the most beautiful part is?" Sophia said softly. "We've proven that real progress doesn't have to come at the cost of humanity. That science and ethics can strengthen each other rather than oppose each other." Marcus nodded, thinking of all the people who had contributed to this transformation, of Elena, who despite her crimes had helped in the recovery, of Sarah, who had shown that forgiveness was possible without denying the past, of his father, whose early warnings had ultimately not been in vain. "This isn't the end," he said, looking out over the city. "It's a new beginning for all of us." Maria smiled. "A beginning based on truth, respect, and an understanding of the complexity of the human mind. And on the power of real memories," Eduardo added. "Not the perfect versions Elena wanted to create, but the authentic moments that make us who we are." As the last rays of sunlight faded and the city lights flickered on one by one, they stood there together. This team that had been through so much. They had not only uncovered a conspiracy or saved victims, they had found a new way forward, a path that balanced science and humanity. "There will be new challenges," Isabella said, "new questions, new ethical dilemmas, and we'll face them. Together," Sophia replied, "with everything we've learned." Marcus looked at his team, his family, and felt a deep gratitude. In their fight against Project Phoenix, they had found something far more valuable than scientific breakthroughs or professional recognition. They had found the truth about what it means to be human, with all our memories, our pain, and our hope. And as night fell over São Paulo, he knew that this story, their story, would endure as a testament to the unbreakable human spirit and the power of authentic memories.